how does this apply for rendering, you might ask? Using material override to test lighting. Now, photographers use something called a gray card reference to get even tones across images. They'll expose for a certain mid-gray, and this will allow them to take even lit shots across a number of shots. Now, how does this apply for rendering, you might ask? Well, in photography, if you expose for light areas, the dark areas are too dark, and if you expose for dark areas, your light areas are too light. And that's why they use a gray card and expose for mid-gray often, which will then bring an even tone across a number of shots. So in 3D, the learnings from that is what I normally do when I light a complex scene is I start with a basic gray as a lighting override material. So right now my scene is fully textured, but I'm going to override those textures, and the reason I override it is because shadows get lost on dark textures and highlights get lost on light textures. So I want to get an even or mid-gray tone right across the scene, and by rendering a mid-gray tone, this will enable me to see what the lighting does and how it reacts to the scene when all materials are same. It's basically you level the playing field and you set your lights up in a way that you can easily visually measure it. And by testing a mid-gray or a mid-range gray override, it will allow you to set base lighting, in other words, the amount of ambient light or global light in the scene. And that's very important, seeing how the scene is lit overall. Once you have a good idea of how your scene is lit overall, obviously you can add key lights, and the shadows and highlights are much more apparent when you view that in a material override, which is really great. And once the lighting is right, then turn off the material override and make minor tweaks to the lighting if it is affected by the textures. Rendering and using a mist pass to visually communicate depth. Now in real life there's something called turbidity. Now turbidity is the visual effect of haziness or fogginess in the air. In other words, if you look into the distance in whatever city it is that you live in, then what you see right in front of you will be clear, but what you see in the distance will be quite hazy or foggy. Now this is called turbidity, and it is caused by dust particles, pollution, or other particles in the air. Now turbidity often makes an image more real. What often gives away 3D is that they look, there's a unanimous look right across the scene, and that's never the case in real life. Secondly, renders are often too crisp and even causes, which even causes a lack in depth perception, and this effect it affects the realism in a negative way. It takes away some of the realism. So in Blender, adding turbidity can be done using a mist pass, which can be saved out separately and used to create turbidity effect. Now the great thing with your mist pass is you can use it as a mist pass, just in an overlay, in a Photoshop overlay, down the opacity slightly, but then duplicating that pass and using it as an alpha channel in your color correction slot as well. And this could combine your turbidity with a little bit of dirt in the air, for instance, maybe a little bit more red or yellow in the air. This really enhances photorealism, and it just takes environment renders one level up. So motion can be a powerful tool in bringing any scene to life. And maybe just an explainer from real life here. There are 6 types of different eye movements, one of which it's called saccadic movement, is an involuntary movement of the eye that brings new objects of interest into view, and it's often triggered by motion. So as I find, even on my Instagram account, I find the stills with moving elements, in other words videos, are a lot better in terms of viewing or view count, and often they draw the eye in a way that a still doesn't, because your eye is automatically and involuntarily attracted to motion. I normally go by a rule: if the camera is static, then move an object, or if the scene is static, then move the camera. And so obviously it doesn't have to be complicated. In an environment like this, I'm literally just moving the sky to create some visual interest, but you can benefit hugely from adding some form of motion to your scene and also stimulate visual interest.